Morning, everyone, or afternoon, or dinner. I'm back here. Jay's back. I won't be able to make weekly schedules that fits everyone's schedule, so I'm gonna start recording videos that would matter in our situation when we're migrating this code base from my account to your account. Thanks, Riley, for volunteering, by the way. Today we're gonna talk about main.py and the middleware, something called middleware that we use to keep our database pool accessible from outside the main.py file. Before we go on, I'm really dumb and I'm not a master by any means in fast APIs. Documentation should always be your best friend. Whatever I'm saying here might absolutely be not true. It might be completely wrong. However, I still believe that it may help you understand this code better. So I'm gonna try my best to be as accurate as possible and as co easy to understand as possible. Please excuse my English skill. My English is really bad too. Anyway, I have sent you guys two repository, which is one with the full code in it, other one where it's like a Lego block. It's up for you to fill out. But then I realized that you can't really start filling it out until you understand why request that pull has database pull in it. Like we never said it explicitly on the other files. Other tutorials on YouTube says set the database with the app.state.pool because they're a single file application. Every logic is in one single file, which is main.py or app.py, depends on the tutorial. So since our application was a little bigger than that, let's go through it and make sure that at least you can understand at least a little bit about what's going on. And I'm gonna try my best. I'm sorry guys already. I'm pretty bad at talking. As I said, I'm not master nor I'm really the very, very basic beginner on Fast API. So whatever I say here, check back with documentation. Always the best friend. So right at this moment, I want to skip this part right now, but talk about this part first. So I'm pretty sure you guys took CS 178 or CS 188 software engineering. When you make a Flask application, you put a lot of stuff in it. When you have an app equals Flask, blah, 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 you have all this, right? Same for the Fast API. So our titles bank API. Description is just documentation from other page. It's for the Swagger UI that when you go to our docs page, you see how all the like a fancy color thing, very colorful. You can like plug in values and you can send a request, see if it works, anything like that. That's actually all defined here, but this is not important right now. It's something that we should worry about once we get to the end of semester when we add a lot of feature after migrating this code to whoever you are. So I'm gonna skip it for now because this is like a separate thing. It's not really a logic anyway. And then our version 2.0, our first version 0, was actually built in with the JavaScript Express. But then there was some errors and issues that I could not possibly figure out. So we migrated to Fast API. That's our version 1, but it wasn't asynchronous. It wasn't using the benefits that Fast API provides. So now we built it asynchronously. It's version 2 and running in serverless environment. Great, right? Open API tags, same thing, more for like a documentation purpose. It's a separate file, but we're not going to talk about it at this moment. And middlewares is defined here, but skip it for now. Root path is dev because since we're using API gateway, AWS Lambda to deploy this application, API gateway puts another little information called development stage in front of your URL. So since ours is still in developer environment, our prefix is dev, When this is finished and we are ready for the production, the root path would be /prod. This is something that we'll talk about later on as well when we go over how to actually deploy in AWS services. But for now, just remember, it's just an extra step because you're using API gateway. Docs URL, I mean, pretty obvious, our docs are just docs, right? So this is what I want to really talk about. App, it's an annotation, right? App.unEvent startup. When you get this annotation with the startup here, what happens is that you're only running this once when the application starts. So background on this, that why do we have this? Because when you create a database connection, it takes a long time. So let's say if you have a million requests or something and you have to make a database connection every single time, that will be a great that will be a great waste of time. So there's something called database pooling where you create a bunch of database connection at the beginning and then maintain the connection or create new connection if it's possible. I believe AIO MySQL is handling all that behind the scenes. So what you want to do is once your application starts, you want to create this pool of databases, like 10, 15 different connections, and store it somewhere so you can use it. And whenever you use it, it's going to just pull one of them out, give them this database connection, and then we'll be ready to go. We won't have to manually create connection and waste our time. Of course, it's a print statement. I should remove it, but I'm sorry about this. App.unEvent shutdown. This is actually opposite of a startup. Whenever your application is stopping, this method will be called. I am not 100% sure if this is true. As I mentioned, I'm still learning as well. But if you have a database pooling and if you close the application, there may be database connection left, and there'll be waste of resources for our database side because they are maintaining the connection even though we are not. So I was told that it's a great practice when you're shutting down your application, you close all the database connections that you have in the pool. So that's why this was used. So this is very important. The app.middleware and then HTTP. This is what makes us application could be multi-file instead of a single file like shorter tutorials on YouTube does. Because our application is a little bigger, we want to separate our logics into different files and different folders, right? But our database pooling is stored in app.state.pool, and app is defined in main.py. However, since this is like an entry point of the file, we can really import this app from other files. For example, if I want to use the app.state pool in this file, single audit controller.py, and then we want to use app, we can just, I don't know, from main import app. This actually gives you an error, but so far it doesn't. Weird. I got a lot of errors because of this. So maybe it's just importing itself. It's fine. It may give you an error. Excuse me. May give you an error once you're running the application. So in order to use our database pooling that we stored in app.state.pool, we need something called middleware. So I know we talked a little bit about HTTP requests last semester. When the request comes in, it goes to controller, right? And then controller with the request and stuff like that. But if you have a middleware, the request does not go directly to controller. It goes through a middleware. That's why it's called middleware, because it's the middle right there. And then after whatever logic in middleware is done, it's gonna pass it to the controller in our case. So because we can, so I know some of you may have experience with Express, but you guys heard about like rec and res, like rec to parameters, like something res sends 404 pages not good or something like that. This is the same. Whenever we're getting a request, we're literally getting the request, And then before we pass it to the controllers, we're defining, hey, there's something in the request. We're gonna set request.state.pool as app.state.pool. So when the request is passed to the controller, it has the pool information in its state. So if you actually see here, request.state.pool, it's a request object, but we're creating a state.pool. We're gonna give it the database pooling, and then we're gonna pass it. We're gonna pass it to the controller so they have that information in request.state.pool, right? So if you see it right here, this one doesn't have an app.state.pool. So how are we gonna get the data? So controller needs to pass it to the service is gonna pass it to the repository, but repository is gonna need a database connection to actually query the data back, right? So what's going on is that because we went through the middleware, the request has a state, and then state as a pool, right? Request.state.pool has a database connection, database pool. So if you actually go to get single table, so what it takes is that it requires database pool table name, because single table query, we're usually like giving the table name as a path parameter or path variable. I can't remember at this point, but so since the get single table requires pool to be passed, oh great, we got request from get single table, so we're just going to pass request.state.pool. And if you go to the repository logic for this particular service, we actually have a method where it passes pool and query. Query is a select all from table name, limit is for something. And if you go to SQL, it actually creates a SQL. In this part, we can see that. So this is just all fancy, but it's really just saying pool.acquire is like, hey, give me a single connection, and then conduct cursor and cur.execute. We've been through in CS178, right? It's basically using the connection and the SQL they created on a repository layer to query the data and fetch the data back. So hopefully the request.state.pool makes sense, because it's like a crucial part of filling out the empty code base that was given. I don't think I did a sufficient job explaining what's going on, and I'm very sorry for that. I'm not a great talker, but please contact me if you have a question. You know my email, you know my Slack, you even have me in MS Teams. So, so yeah, call me. But other than that, include router, because it's like we use the router for the different files and stuff. For the controller, we need to include it. Handler, Mangum is a library that's really cool, because you can just wrap it around. If you can wrap your application, and it gives you a handler. Because keep in mind, we're running this in AWS Lambda, not a traditional server environment. AWS Lambda is a handler, and the Mangum is a library that help us to wrap the code that is written like this, where it's like the traditional server style, right? But it's gonna wrap it around, give a nice handler, so we can run it in the AWS Lambda. If you want to learn about this particular AIO MySQL pool, I suggest AIO MySQL documentation. That's where I got all those stuff. It's really well written. It was a little challenging, but it definitely worth looking into. So I definitely recommend you guys trying to use it before, because we're not using any ORMs or stuff like that. We're just using direct connection. So yeah, contact me if you have a question. Hopefully this was helpful. Thank you. Have a great day, night, dinner, whatever.